Welcome back to the Speak Vora podcast, the place where we have honest, real conversations using natural, everyday English that you can actually apply in your daily life without feeling like you're sitting in a boring classroom staring at a textbook that makes no sense.
That's absolutely right, Anna. And today, we're talking about something that every single language learner experiences at some point in their journey. That painful, frustrating moment when your motivation completely disappears and everything inside you just wants to stop trying altogether.
And before we get into today's topic, I want to share something personal. When I first started learning a second language, I was so incredibly excited that I bought 3 different workbooks, downloaded 5 apps on my phone, and told all my friends that I was going to be fluent within 6 months, which, looking back now, was one of the most unrealistic things I have ever believed in my entire life.
I completely understand that feeling, Anna, because when I started learning Spanish a few years ago, I studied every single day for the first 2 weeks with so much energy and passion that I even changed my phone language to Spanish just to force myself to practice. But then, suddenly, in the 3rd week, something shifted inside me, and I opened my textbook one evening, stared at it for about 30 seconds, and then quietly closed it and watched television instead.
That moment you just described, Jake, is something I like to call the motivation cliff. It's that point where the initial excitement of starting something new completely runs out and the real, unglamorous, difficult work begins. And most people, unfortunately, mistake that feeling for a sign that they are not talented enough or not cut out for learning languages.
And that is such a dangerous mistake to make, because what I eventually realized after many weeks of inconsistency and guilt was that I hadn't lost my ability to learn Spanish at all. I had simply lost the novelty and excitement of being a complete beginner, and those are 2 very different things that people constantly confuse with each other.
So let's talk about why this happens to almost everyone, because understanding the reason behind something is always the first step towards solving it. And the first big reason people lose motivation is that their expectations are completely disconnected from reality. They see fluent speakers on social media making everything look effortless and natural, and they assume that their own journey should look exactly the same way without understanding the thousands of hours of invisible practice that went into that fluency.
The second reason is something I personally struggled with for a very long time, which is not being able to see your own progress. Because when you're learning a language, the improvement happens so slowly and so gradually that it feels like you're standing completely still, even when you're actually moving forward every single day. And I remember one specific moment where I was listening to a Spanish podcast and I suddenly understood an entire sentence without translating it in my head. And I realized that 3 months earlier, that would have been completely impossible for me.
That kind of invisible progress is so real. And the third reason people lose motivation is comparison. Scrolling through social media and seeing someone who has been learning for 5 years and thinking, why don't I sound like that yet? When you've only been learning for 5 weeks. And that comparison is not just unfair to yourself, it's actually one of the most destructive habits a language learner can develop because it replaces your personal progress with someone else's highlight reel.
Now, let me tell you about the most important mindset shift that completely changed the way I approach learning. And it happened during a conversation I had with an older colleague at work who had learned 4 languages over the course of his life. And I asked him what his secret was, expecting some incredible studying technique or special method. And he just smiled and said, I never waited to feel ready. I just showed up every day, even when I felt terrible.
That is such a powerful story, Jake, because it perfectly illustrates the difference between motivation and discipline. Motivation is the exciting feeling that makes you start something, but discipline is the quiet, unglamorous commitment that keeps you going on the days when you feel exhausted, distracted, uninspired, and completely certain that you're making no progress whatsoever.
And the most practical way I found to build that discipline was to make my daily habit so incredibly small that my brain had absolutely no reason to resist it. Instead of telling myself I needed to study for an hour every day, I committed to just 5 minutes of focused English practice. And on my lowest energy days, I would sometimes do just 2 minutes. But the important thing was that I never let the number drop to 0.
I tried something very similar when I was going through a particularly exhausting period at work last year, where I had almost no free time and very little mental energy left at the end of the day, and I decided that my only rule was to listen to 10 minutes of a Speak Vora podcast during my morning commute, which was something I was already doing anyway, and just making that conscious decision to count it as my daily practice completely changed how I felt about my progress.
Another strategy that made a huge difference for me was reconnecting with my personal why, the deep emotional reason I started learning in the first place. Because when you're feeling unmotivated and you're questioning whether it's even worth continuing, you need something more powerful than just willpower to keep you going. And for me, that reason was wanting to have a real conversation with my grandmother, who only spoke Spanish and who I was slowly losing the chance to connect with as she got older.
That is a beautiful and deeply personal reason, Jake, and I think everyone listening right now has their own version of that story. Maybe it's wanting to travel confidently to another country, or getting a better job opportunity, or simply being able to watch your favorite movies and shows without needing subtitles. And whatever your reason is, I want you to write it down somewhere you will see it every single morning before you start your day.
Because on the days when motivation is completely gone and discipline feels impossible, your why becomes the emotional anchor that reminds you that this temporary feeling of wanting to quit is much smaller and much less important than the long-term goal you are working toward every single day with every small action you take.
And the final thing we want to leave you with today is the understanding that low energy days, unmotivated days, and even days where you feel like you've forgotten everything you've learned are completely normal and expected parts of any long-term learning journey. And the only people who actually reach fluency are not the ones who were always motivated. They're the ones who kept going even when they absolutely didn't feel like it.
So the next time you feel like closing the textbook, turning off the podcast, or telling yourself that you'll start again tomorrow, I want you to remember that you don't need to do everything. You just need to do something, even if that something is reading one paragraph, repeating 3 sentences out loud, or simply listening to English while you drink your morning coffee.
Your progress is not built in the big, exciting moments of inspiration. It's built in the small, quiet, consistent moments that nobody sees. The 5 minutes before bed, the 10 minutes during lunch, the single vocabulary word you reviewed while waiting for the bus. And all of those tiny moments are adding up to something truly remarkable, even when it doesn't feel that way.
So don't stop. Just make it smaller, keep your chain alive, remember your why, and trust the process completely. Because every single minute you invest in learning English today is a gift you are giving to your future self.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today on the Speak Vora podcast. Take care of yourself, be patient with your progress, and as always, keep going.